What's up, people? It's DevSage here, and in this video I'm coming with another project-based web scraper tutorial. So let's set up a scenario. Let's say that there's a business owner named Sam. Sam approaches you and he says, hey, I have this great business idea or product that I know will bring in a lot of money. This is a B2B or a business-to-business product, so my target audience is other business owners. I have the product built and I have salespeople ready to sell, but I don't have any leads. I need to collect a bunch of leads and phone numbers so that my salespeople can go out and sell. Can you help me? And then you say to Sam, you say, well, I don't have any leads in my back pocket, but I can probably build a scraper to collect a bunch of phone numbers from businesses in your area. And then Sam says, okay, cool. That sounds great. So now we need to build a scraper to collect those phone numbers for Sam's salespeople. But where are we going to find these leads? Where are we going to find these numbers? Well, there's a website out there called manta.com, and they have a public directory of all kinds of businesses across the United States. So if we navigate over to manta.com, and if you hover over business directory, and if you click search business directory, and if we go down to see more, on this page there are different categories of companies. Companies here you can see are grouped by industry, but they are also, if you scroll down, grouped by state. And let's say Sam wants to start by gathering leads from businesses in South Carolina. And so on this page, we have a whole bunch of business listings with various phone numbers for different businesses across South Carolina. Cool. So all we have to do now is write a script that makes some kind of request to this page and scrapes this information and saves all of these businesses to some kind of database, or it could just be a CSV file in this case. But before we write any code, let's try scraping this page first in Postman. All right, so first things first, if you don't have Postman installed, you're going to want to go to Google and type in Postman download. And it should be this first link that comes up that says download Postman. You're going to want to click that. And on the left side here, depending on your operating system, you're going to see a button that says Windows 64-bit, or if you're on a Mac, it'll say something like Mac OS. Make sure to click that and download Postman. But if you already have it installed, you're going to want to copy this link and open Postman. And you're going to want to add a new request. So new HTTP request. And if we paste this link here, theoretically what should happen is when we send this GET request to this URL, we should get the HTML of this actual web page that we're looking at in the browser. So let's see what happens. Okay, so we clicked send, and looks like the results that we got back is it is HTML, but it doesn't look like the HTML for the actual page. It's way too short. It says just a moment, but the main thing to look at here is the status that was returned, which is a 403 forbidden. And as you can see in the description, this represents a legal request, but the server is refusing to respond to it. So in this case, it seems like whenever we call this same endpoint with a tool like Postman, Manta.com is sending back 403. So it doesn't look like Manta actually likes us asking for their web pages with tools or scripts. And so this is a problem. So this is, you know, this is a legitimate security measure. If you don't want bots that, you know, people write to be able to scrape your web pages, it's a legitimate security measure. But how can we get around this? So how are we going to be able to get Sam his leads if we can't use a tool, or in this case later on a script, to actually get these leads? Like I said, manta.com can see that we're asking for this web page using an automated tool, Postman in this case. They want us to access their information only from a browser. So what we can do is we can route our request through a proxy server before it gets to manta.com in order to disguise the fact that we're using an automated tool. A proxy is just a server that sits in between the client, us, and the end server, manta.com. And so the proxy we're going to use is from the Web Unblocker service from Oxy Labs. Oxy Labs Web Unblocker is an AI-powered proxy solution that can help us extract public information from even the most difficult sites like manta.com. It'll allow us to imitate real website users, and it has features like maintaining sessions, automatic retries, and browser fingerprint generation. Oxy Labs is one of the leading premium proxy providers in the market. You have things like residential proxies, data center proxies, web crawlers, or scraper APIs. Oxy Labs has the largest ethically gathered proxy pool in the world. It's exceptionally performant, and it has universal location support. So if you wanted to route your requests through a proxy server in a particular city, you can do that. This kind of thing might come in handy if a website that you're trying to visit is blocked from your country and you wanted to basically disguise yourself using a proxy server in order to access that content. In our case, though, we're going to be using a proxy server to disguise ourselves as a user that's using the browser instead of Postman or some other script. Okay, so just to give you a sneak peek of the power of the Web Unblocker, I'm going to set up a proxy in Postman to route my requests through before they get to manta.com. And so to do that, I'm going to go up to this gear and then click Settings. And under the Proxy tab here, we're going to go to the proxy configuration for sending requests. And we're going to make sure this Add a Custom Proxy Configuration box is checked. And here's where we need to put some information in. So you're going to want to make sure these two checkboxes are checked, HTTP and HTTPS. And the proxy server is going to be unblock.oxylabs.io at port 60,000. So this is the server that we're going to be routing our requests through. And this server is authenticated, so you're going to need a username and password. So make sure proxy auth is on. And where you get this username and password from, you actually get that from Oxy Labs. So once you sign up for your free trial and log in, you should be brought to this dashboard. Yours might look a little bit different than mine, but under the side menu here, you should see Web Unblocker. And if you expand that, you should be able to go to users. You can ignore this. I don't think that's quite right. And what you're seeing might be a little bit different than what I'm seeing. I think by default, Oxy Labs sets up a default user for you. And like I said, it might look a little different, but I think there's some kind of a button that you can click to open up some kind of menu so that you can see your current password. So whatever that looks like on your screen, just find that and make sure you can grab your username and password and then copy and paste that here. And then once you do that, you're going to close that out. And let's try this request again and let's see what happens. And so it takes a couple seconds to route the request. And as you can see, we no longer get a 403. We got a 200 OK. And it looks like we got the HTML data of the actual web page this time. So the result is a lot longer than what we saw before. And if we take a quick peek, it looks like this looks like some business, Tower Development Group, 11 North Irvine Street, Greenville, South Carolina. And then there's the phone number. So yeah, it looks like we were finally able to get through. We basically tricked manta.com into thinking that we were accessing the site through a browser, by routing our request first through a proxy server. And so that's just a little sneak peek of how that actually works and the power that the unblocker gives us. And now let's dive into the actual project. All right, so if we open up VS Code, you can see that I have a Manta project folder here with a single tsconfig JSON file. I'll leave a link to this file in the description or in a pinned comment so that you can just copy and paste this into your own project. But for right now, we're going to want to make sure we have all of our packages installed. So first off, we're going to want to make sure that we have nodemon installed. So let's install nodemon globally. And nodemon is a tool that's going to allow us to run a node script in watch mode, basically, such that whenever you make a change to the script, nodemon will restart the script on the fly. We'll also want to make sure that we have TypeScript installed globally. So let's do npm install -g TypeScript. All right. So now let's actually make this folder, this Manta project folder, a node project. So let's do npm init -y. All right. So we have our package JSON and it filled out some of the fields for us. So now let's install our packages. So some of the packages that we're going to need for this is we're going to need a package called command line args, because ultimately we're going to use this script as a command line tool. So because we're going to want to parse options, and also we're going to need a package called https proxy agent, a package called JSON to CSV, so that we can convert the lead data into CSVs so that, you know, the salespeople can open a spreadsheet and look at the data. And then also node fetch to request the data in the first place. So let's run that. All right, so we got those packages installed. And I think we're going to need some type definitions as well. So let's do npm install. And let's save as dev dependencies @types node and @types node fetch. All right, that all looks great. So now let's create an index.ts that will serve as the entry point for our script. So let's say touch index.ts. All right. And first off, let's go back to the package JSON and let's make sure that this says index.ts for the main. All right, and let's go back to our index.ts, and here let's write the script that goes and fetches the lead data from manta.com and then creates a spreadsheet with that data. And so let's work on our imports. So let's say import https proxy agent, and let's import fetch from node fetch. Let's also import JSON to CSV from JSON to CSV, and import fs or from fs. Oops, let's say as fs. So this is the file system module. And let's go down here and let's say const command line args equals require command line args. And then command line options equals command line args, calling that function. Let's pass in essentially so this package, remember, is the package responsible for making it easy for us to parse command line options that we pass to the script when we run it. And so what we're doing here is we're gonna basically tell it what kind of options we want to be able to pass to this script. And so in this case, whenever we go out to fetch some data, because if we go back to manta.com, so here what we're actually going to do is, so we kind of saw that the businesses are being loaded here on the screen in kind of a infinity load technique here, right? Let's actually, instead of scraping the actual page here, let's just try to make a direct HTTP request to their API. And so what we're going to do is, when we inspect in the network tab, and let's scroll down a little bit to see what happens when more businesses are loaded, we see that this request is being made here. So let's see, manta.com, more results, 41 all 41, page 4. And so what's happening is, when you scroll down to a certain point, manta.com asks for another page of businesses, and each page is denoted by this PG query string parameter. And so this is what we're actually going to be using in our application. So let's copy this for right now, and I'm going to put this just for right now in a comment, just so we can have it for reference later. But what we're going to do for our script, we're going to want to be able to pass in essentially how many pages we want to fetch. And so if we go back, let's create a new command line argument to say, let's give a command line option of pages, and its alias is going to be P, and it's going to be of type number. So now let's go down here and let's create a variable called CSV file name. Let's set it to, let's say, the current directory name, dir name /leads, and let's create a date stamp for this. And so you can see Copilot is kind of already predicting what I'm going to do. So let's do that. New date.getTime. So it's going to be whatever the directory name is /leads - the current date in milliseconds .csv. All right, so let's create another variable down here, basically configuring our proxy. First of all, remember that unblocker username and password from Postman? Let's see if I can pull it up real quick. The way we set up our proxy, if we go back here, so we had this username and password that we basically have to use to authenticate to the unblocker service to say, hey, this is who we are, we have an account. And so we're going to want to bring these credentials into our script. And so let's copy and paste this. So let's copy that. And let's create a variable called unblocker username. And let's set that equal to my username. Oops. And then also I'm going to have an unblocker password. I'm going to copy and paste my password. And by the time you guys see this, my password is going to be long changed, so I'm not really worried about that. Oops, I accidentally copied the username twice. So let's copy that. Let's get that in there. Cool. All right. And now let's actually set up the proxy. So let's say const agent equals new HTTPS proxy agent. Copilot already knows what I'm going to do, kinda. And let's set the URL for the proxy. So basically, remember this URL here, unblock.oxylabs.io, port 60,000. Let's set HTTP : / unblocker username : unblocker password, and then let's say at unblock.oxylabs.io at port 60,000. Cool, so our proxy is set up. One of the things that we're going to need to do is set basically a specific process environment variable, basically that our script is going to need to to be able to call the proxy in the first place. So let's just say process.env node TLS reject unauthorized equals 0. So now let's actually create a function here. So let's say function run, and right below it, let's just call run. And here is where we're gonna, first of all, take the number of pages that we passed in, and basically however many pages we have, we're gonna call this particular endpoint, remember from earlier, and we're gonna pass in that particular page. So for each call, we're gonna get back a chunk of businesses. We're gonna parse that data out, convert it to CSV, and append it to this CSV file. And for however many pages, like I said, we're gonna call this endpoint $PG1, PG2, PG3, PG4, and we're gonna take all that data and dump it into a CSV. And so let's do that. So let's go down here into function run, and first of all, let's parse out, let's figure out how many pages we should parse. So let's say const max pages equals, and remember, so let's go back up here to command options, and let's say command options dot pages. So that's the maximum number of pages. But what if we don't pass in a command line option for the number of pages? Well, let's just default to 5 pages. That should be sufficient. And let's add some console logs along the way to kind of help us figure out where we're at. So let's say console log, and let's say job started, pages to fetch, and let's pass in max pages. And let's create like a, let's make things a little colorful here. All right, cool. So we got the number of pages we want to fetch. And now let's go, let's say try catch error, and let's say, let's fill this in later. But for right now, let's loop through all the pages. So let's say for, let's scroll down. Let current page equals 1, current page less than or equal to max pages, current page plus plus for, so for each of the pages from 1 to the maximum number of pages, we're going to send a request. But first, let's add another console log so we can keep track of where we are. So let's say console log fetching page current page of max pages. All right, and so let's say const response equals await fetch, and let's pass in that URL, manta.com more results. And so let's do this. Well, let's just grab the whole thing, and let's put that in the template literal. All right, cool. But remember, we want to be able to dynamically get a page based off of what we passed in. So this last bit is going to be PG equals current page. All right, and we're getting a complaint here because await can only be called inside of an async function. So let's go back up here and say async. So let's pass in another argument here to our fetch call. It's going to be an object with method get, and then we're going to pass in the agent so that we can tell fetch to proxy this request through our agent, which remember we set up to be to point to our unblocker service with our username and our password. So now let's add a catch handler here to, you know, catch any errors that might occur. And let's say console log, there was an error fetching the page. Let's say current page. Yeah, I think that's good. Well, let's do this. Current page colon error. And let's return. We don't want to continue processing after that if there's an error. Cool. Okay, so now that we sent the request, let's make sure to do any other error handling below. So if we, for example, don't have a response, we want to make sure to throw a new error here. Response is undefined. That is fine. We also want to check the status code of the response to make sure it's in the 200 range. So let's say if response.ok, if not response.ok. Basically, response.ok is a fetch property that says, the status code of this response is in the range of 200 to 299. And so if that's not the case, then we got some other 300, 400, or 500 level error. So we want to be able to throw an error on that. So let's say throw new error. Let's say an error has occurred when fetching. Let's print the status code and the status text. Oh, so that works. Status code, and let's also get the status message as well. So let's say message, and it says response dot status text. Yep, that should work. Okay. And so now if we get to this point, we've asked for the data, we've validated the response to make sure everything's okay. Now let's try to parse the response, and it's going to come back as JSON. But let's say let text response equals, and let's say await response dot text. And so because I've done this before, I know it's going to come back as text, and I know that it's going to be JSON, but it's not going to be properly formatted. So we're going to want to do a replace all here. Like I said, this is probably going to seem like magic because I've already done this before, but essentially we're going to replace all the new line characters with white space in order to get it properly formatted. And so now we're going to convert this text to actual JSON. So let's say const JSON page equals JSON.parse text response. And I guess I should show you what this data actually looks like. So if we go back to manta.com, for example, and we dig into that request, what do we get back? So if we go to the response here, let's see if we can get this properly formatted. So this is the response that manta.com, or the API, sent back to the front end here. And as you can see, we have a couple different properties here on the top level. We have a companies, featured companies, geography, industry, node, and paging. The only property we're really interested in here is the companies property. And if we dig in, we can see we have some more properties here. Count 35. So looks like it got 35 companies. It has a total count of 266,000. So there are a lot of companies here in total. But it just gave us 35, and it gives us the list of those companies. And so if we dig into that, we see we have a bunch of different companies here with the information. So we have the contact info, which has the phone number inside of it. We have the name of the company and a whole lot more information. But the only things we care about are the name of the company and the contact info, or the phone number inside of the contact info. And so we can model that with types in our TypeScript file, right? So if we go back, let's actually create some types here. And we're going to create them in a new file. So we're going to say, let's create a new file here called models. And in this case, I'm going to create a couple of interfaces here. I'm going to create an interface that represents basically a page of results, kind of like how we just saw. So let's say interface page or iPage, and we saw that, like we said, the page, when I say page, I mean this top level page here. We have this company's property, which is the only thing we really care about. So we're gonna say companies. It's gonna equal to some object. We haven't created the type for this, but let's just, for right now, call it iCompanies. And let's go down and create that. So let's say interface iCompanies. And now the type we're trying to represent is this company's property here, this right here. The only property we really care about is the list here because it has the actual companies. So let's go down and let's create a list property, and let's call this type iCompany. Well, an array of iCompanies. And now let's go down and create that type. So let's say interface iCompany, and an iCompany is going to have a contact info property with a phone property inside of it and a name property. So let's go back. All right, name is going to be a string, and contact info is going to be an object, literal, with a phone property inside of it. All right, so now that we have these types, let's actually, the only type we're going to actually need to export is this page here. All right, so if we go back to index.ts, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go down to JSON page here, and let's add the type of iPage. We're going to need to import it. See if that did it. Yep, so that did it for me. All right, so now if I do something like JSON page, the autocomplete is going to say, oh, you want the company's property, which is going to have a list property and so on and so forth. So let's actually grab the company's property. Let's destructure it into its own variable. So let's say const companies equals JSON page. All right. And now let's loop through all of the companies in, remember, companies.list. Let's loop through all of those companies and grab the name and the contact info, or basically the name and the phone number of each company. And so let's say const leads, and we're going to create a new array of iLeads, which, remember, we actually haven't created that type. I got ahead of myself. So let's go down and let's create a type for iLeads. So export interface iLead, and let's say this is going to be company name string and then the phone number string. And so let's go over here and let's import this. And what we're going to do is we're going to set this equal to companies.list.map for each company. We're going to grab the name and the phone number. So let's say const name and contact info equals company. Let's grab the phone number out of the contact info by destructuring it, and let's return company name with name and then phone. All right, so we're creating an array of iLeads, which are basically object literals that follow this pattern with the company name and the phone number. And what we're going to do, let's say, for example, a business doesn't have a phone number. We're going to want to filter out any businesses that don't have phone numbers. Those are going to be useless to us. And so let's go down and let's say dot filter for each lead that we just created. Let's just say lead.phone number is not equal to undefined. All right. So now that we have our leads, then let's save these leads as a CSV file. So let's go down here. And first, let's add some log. So let's say console.log fetched. Let's say how many leads we fetched. So let's say leads.length leads. So we fetched this many leads, and let's add a little dot here. And let's say console log. We're now going to try to convert the leads to CSV. So let's say converting to CSV. Let's add a little recycling emoji here. All right, so now we're going to make use of our little JSON to CSV package. So let's go down here and let's say const CSV equals await JSON to CSV. We're going to pass in leads. And we're going to say prepend header false. And what we're going to want to do then is we're going to take that CSV and write it to the actual file that's going to have the name that we defined above right here. And let's delete this for right now. We're done with that. And so let's go down here and let's console log generating CSV file. And let's say cool. All right, so now we're going to say fs.write file sync. We're going to pass in the file name, CSV file name, and we're going to pass in the CSV content itself, and we're going to want to write a new line at the end of it, just so that the next time that we append to this file for the next page, it's always going to be appropriately on the next line and not on the last line that was written. And we're going to also say we're going to add a flag here to say that we want to be able to append to this file. All right, and let's add another log to say, hey, we just finished writing to this CSV. So wrote to CSV file. Or we'll pass in the name of the file we wrote to. So CSV file name. Let's say that. And let's add a little check mark. All right, cool. That is pretty much it. One thing we're gonna want to do though is, so remember how this is gonna happen. So just a recap of what's gonna happen here. So we're gonna call run. We're gonna figure out how many pages we want to fetch from manta.com based off of the command line arguments that we passed in, or we're going to fall back to 5 pages if no options are passed in. We're going to loop through all of those pages from 1 to however many pages there are, and we're going to fetch each page of lead data, of business data, and we're going to forward our requests through our proxy agent that we set up somewhere. Where do we set it up at? Right here. We're going to forward that request through the unblocker service. Then we're going to do a little bit of error handling to make sure everything was cool. And once we figured out, okay, we actually got some good data back, we're going to parse that. It's actually going to come back as text. It's JSON text, but it's technically going to come back as text that we're going to have to clean up a little bit. But then we're going to parse it, and we're going to loop through all of that JSON data and grab the specific bits that we care about, namely the business name and the number. And we're going to filter out any businesses that don't have phone numbers. And then we're going to convert those to CSV. And we're going to write that CSV to a file. So that's a little recap. One thing I do want to add here, though, is this for loop is going to happen just like one right after another. We don't want manta.com getting suspicious of us immediately hitting their API over and over and over real quick. So for right now, let's add a sleep function in to wait say 10 or 15 seconds between each for loop run. That's going to help us not get rate limited. So let's create a sleep function, and we're actually going to create this in a new file. So let's say utils.ts, and let's say export function sleep, and we're going to pass in the number of seconds that we want to be able to sleep for. And so let's say seconds number, and let's say console log. That works, sleeping for this number of seconds. And you don't have to think too hard about what this does if you don't understand it, but let's just return a new promise. Yeah, Copilot already knows what I want to do. So basically we're just going to return a new promise that calls set timeout, which is going to run a function after a certain amount of milliseconds elapse. And the function that is going to call after that number of seconds elapse is the resolve function for the promise. And so this promise won't be resolved. It'll basically stop the execution of the JavaScript until this promise is resolved, which won't happen until the set timeout actually expires. And so, like I said, don't think too hard about it if you don't quite understand it, but we're going to use it like this. So if we go back to index.ts, right at the bottom of the for loop, we're going to say await sleep, and this should just bring it in for us. Maybe not. Let's quick fix. Let's import it, and let's wait like 15 seconds. Well, let's say 10 seconds. And so that's how we're going to call it. So that's basically how we're going to sleep before the next run of the for loop is called. And that's almost it. We didn't fill in this catch here. The only thing we really need to do is make sure that we log it. And so Copilot gave me a nice suggestion. An error has occurred, and logging the error here. So I think that is good. So let's actually run this to see what it does. All right, so if we go down to our terminal here and we do nodemon to run the script, looks like we get an error here. Okay, so require of ES module, this node fetch module not supported. Okay, so I remember running into this issue before, and ultimately it's some conflict between node fetch version 3 and TS node, which nodemon uses under the hood. So I think I remember the fix for this is basically just to downgrade node fetch from version 3 to version 2. So let's do npm install node fetch at version 2, and that should clear up that error. So let's try running nodemon again. All right, so cannot find module utils from index.ts. So let's go here, and yeah, so here I am importing sleep from utils as if utils was an npm package, which is not correct. I should just be referencing this file utils. So I need a // here, and the same thing for the models folder. And so if I save that, you can see that nodemon automatically restarted for me, and looks like my script started to run. So job started, pages to fetch 5. So it looks like it used the fallback, and it's fetching page 1 of 5. So we should be right here inside of this for loop right now, requesting that page results, and let's see what happens. It might take a few seconds to actually fetch and return. All right, so it looks like that actually failed. Some error occurred. It looks like it timed out or something. Status code 550 unassigned. Not sure why that happens. I see that occasionally. I don't know if it's an issue with the agent, but let's just run it again to make sure make sure it wasn't a fluke. So pages to fetch 5, fetching 1 of 5. Okay, so it looks like we fetched 35 leads. We converted those from JSON to CSV. We generated the CSV file and we wrote to that file. And so that file got generated here. And looks like we have a mapping of all of the companies to phone numbers. Cool. And we got the first 35. And after that, looks like we slept for 10 seconds. And as you can see, we're fetching the second page of results right now. And the expectation is that once we get those results back, transformed to CSV, we'll append them right to the bottom of this file. And that's exactly what happened. And so we're sleeping for 10 seconds as to not annoy manta.com and to set off any alarm bells. And now we're fetching page 3. And yeah, let's see what this returns back. It's going to be, hopefully the same thing here. Okay. And yeah, it appended those results. And so you get the idea. We built this script to basically ask for lead data from manta.com, disguising ourselves as if we were a real user in the browser. We did that by routing our request through Oxy Labs Unblocker proxy service. And so now we can get those results, transform it from JSON to CSV, and write this CSV data to a file. And so what Sam's salespeople can do is they can go over, they can say, oh, let's see what these leads are. They open Excel and they expand these columns and they have a list of all these phone numbers they can call. And that's pretty much it. That's how we can use Oxy Labs Unblocker proxy service to access information we normally wouldn't have been able to access via a script by disguising ourselves as a real user. And so if you want to test out this service for yourself, I highly recommend it. Just go to the link in the description or in the pinned comment and sign up for a free trial. Peace.